Today, I'll be showing you how to extract the URLs of articles from the New York Times technology section. So, let's get right into it. Hello, my name is Rohak and I'm the founder of Empower Code, helping you make a change with technology. Today marks the 6th episode of my course, Data Science for Media Bias Detection, where we will finish extracting our article hyperlinks from the New York Times. If you haven't watched the previous episode where we used BeautifulSoup and requests to parse HTML, I highly recommend you do so. Now, enough of me talking. Let's get right into it. Awesome guys, so here I have opened up PyCharm, where our script is currently able to extract a content string of all the HTML that contains our article hyperlinks. Now all of this was covered in the previous episode, but if you just want a quick overview, I'll give you one right now. So looking at our method, which is called getContentString, it takes in a URL of a given web page that you want to scrape. Now the first two lines, lines 6 and 7, send a GET request to the page and then assign a BeautifulSoup object with the page's content and with a choice of HTML parser, meaning that BeautifulSoup will generate an HTML outline of our web page. Next, moving down in our code, we use the findAll method of BeautifulSoup to find all containers that match the HTML that we want to extract. Then, using a series of nested for loops, we're able to get all the tags and dictionaries that contain those very article hyperlinks that we want to get. Then we came across a problem. There were several inconsistencies and repeats in our content string. So here, we took the first two elements of our article string, removed all the white space from them, and then only took the first element of our article list as our content string. So finally, the last 3 lines of our code take the index of the item list element, which actually leads to all the article hyperlinks that we want to extract. And then, since we didn't actually want the item list element text in our HTML, we used a substring to get that out of there. Finally, we returned our content string, and let me print this out to the console so you guys can see how it looks. So guys, after running my code, you guys can see that this is the HTML that we pulled from the HTML outline that BeautifulSoup gave us. So as you can see, it contains some URLs, some metadata of its position on the page, its context, which is where it's kind of located, its type, and some more metadata to go along with it. So this is pretty much all we need to perform our article URL extraction that you guys will see throughout the duration of this episode. Awesome, so to start off, let's create a new method called findOccurrences, and this method will be responsible for getting the starting and ending indices of each article hyperlink. So inside our findOccurrences method, we can pass in the given content string containing the HTML that we want to parse. Awesome, but before we go on with our method, we need to find some distinctive patterns about these article hyperlinks. This is always very important when you're performing URL extraction. You want to find patterns amongst all the hyperlinks so you can uniformly extract them without having to do it manually. So here on my screen, as you can see, this given article hyperlink has the following sequence: www.newyorktimes.com/2020. So let's check this pattern against the other URLs in our content string. So here's another URL, and as you guys can see, it starts with the same exact sequence. To finish off our check, let's give it one last check against this URL, and the same pattern follows. So we can now reliably use this pattern and implement it in our method to find the starting index of all our article hyperlinks. So how do we actually get these starting indices themselves? Well, as you can see, I'm currently using a for I in range loop, which will iterate over the length of our content string. Now inside this method, we're going to employ Python's startswith method to get all the starting indices of our article hyperlinks. Let me show you how we do this. So here inside our for loop, what we're going to do is we're going to type in content string, and then we're going to say dot, and then we're going to use the startswith method that I referenced earlier. And then inside this startswith method, we can now enter a pattern of our choice that we want to search for and a given character in our content string. Awesome guys, so as you can see, I entered the pattern we found earlier and passed that in as a parameter into our startsWith function. Now we need a value to compare this pattern with, so I can simply pass in I, which is the loop variable inside our for loop. Next, if the loop variable actually starts with this pattern string that we want to search for, we can simply append it to a separate list. So after creating and initializing a new list called start indices at the beginning of our method, we can simply append the loop variable I to that list if it indeed is a match with our pattern string. Awesome, so inside of my method, I finish it off by printing the start indices list, and after calling the method, you guys can see, if I zoom in here, that we are able to get 4 starting indices of article hyperlinks inside our HTML. Now I've created a new list called end indices, which will store all the ending indices of each article hyperlink. So here inside of our for loop, as you guys can see, I created a new if statement which checks to see if the content string starts with .html. This is because each article hyperlink ends with the .html extension. So by using the startsWith method and testing for .html, I'm actually extracting all the ending indices of our article hyperlinks. So next, I can simply append I, which is a loop variable, to the ending indices list, exactly how we did it for the start indices list. We tested if the content string loop variable started with the .html extension. So we actually have to add 5 to this loop variable to get rid of that .html text. This is so because we want the ending indice of our article hyperlinks to be the very last index of our hyperlink. So if we were to just go with the current setup, it would actually take into account the .html at the end of our hyperlink. We don't want this. This is why we add 5 to remove this nagging .html extension. Awesome. After adding some validation to ensure that the two lists of starting and ending indices are exactly equal, we now see that the start and end indices clearly link to one another. For instance, 58 links to 139, 213 to 290, 364 to 442, and so on. Next, let's create a new method and let's call it getAllURLs. What this method will be responsible for is actually getting the hyperlinks themselves. Awesome guys, so inside we can see that we passed in the lists of starting and ending indices as our parameters along with the content string we extracted previously. With all of our data now set up, we can now create and initialize a given URL list which will actually store all of the hyperlinks. Now using a for I in range loop, we can simply iterate over the length of our start indices list. Next, we can actually append a given substring of our start and end indices list. So what we're going to do is we're going to take content string, which is remember the HTML that we wanted to parse, and then we're going to use a substring notation, which is done in brackets, and then inside we're going to do start indices at I, which is the correct loop variable that we want to use, a colon to indicate a substring, then end indices at I. Now, why is this the case? Well, let me explain all of this and how it works. So as you can see, the page numbers in each element of both lists directly correspond to one another. So like I said, 58 goes to 139, 213 goes to 290, and so on and so forth. So returning to our for loop, we can now take a substring of our content string. So a substring is basically a particular portion of that HTML that we want to extract. And then inside, since the two lists are exactly equal and of the same length, we can simply take the loop variable index I of the start indices list to get the appropriate page numbers. So for instance, on its first iteration, what this method would do is it would append a substring of the content string at 58 to 139. Then in the next iteration, it would go from 213 to 290. And in the next one, it would go from 364 to 442. You guys get the point. So now at the end of our method, we can simply return our URL list. So now, as you can see, we're combining all three of our methods in our news extract file to create one fully functional article URL extractor. So at the top, we assigned a new content string to our getContentString method, which gets the HTML of article hyperlinks that we want. Next, moving down in our code, we get the starting and ending indices with our content string passed in as a parameter to our findOccurrences method. Finally, the last method, which is getAllURLs, we're simply going to pass in our start indices. Next, we're going to pass in our end indices. And finally, we're going to pass in our content string. Let's print this URL list to the console and finally see what you all have been waiting for. Awesome! How cool is that? As you guys can see, it has successfully extracted 4 article hyperlinks of the most recent technology-related articles on the New York Times. So let's actually go to these articles and see how they pop up. So let's actually see these articles and see whether they're actually recent or not. So let's go ahead and click on our first link here. And we're taken to an article about the hot new COVID technology, which is wearable and actually constantly tracks you, which is pretty cool. And so if we scroll down here, we see that it's actually published on November 15th, 2020. And so actually, when I'm recording this video, it's November 16th. So this article is up to date and pretty recent. Let's take a look at our next article, which seems to be about science and SpaceX. Awesome. So scrolling down here, we see that it is about SpaceX resilience, which lifts 4 astronauts into an entirely new era of spaceflight. And if we scroll down here, we can see this article is actually very recent since it has been published on November 15th and updated on November 16th. And November 16th is actually the day when I'm recording this video. And here we are, presented with 4 technology-related articles, each directly pulled from the New York Times, and each one is pretty recent as well. How cool is that? As you guys saw, if we click these articles, we are taken directly to them. Easy, convenient, and smart. Well, thank you so much for watching this episode of my course, Data Science for Media Bias Detection. With all of our URLs extracted, we are now ready for the next step, natural language processing and sentiment analysis. Get ready and stay tuned. Trust me, you won't want to miss out. If you still have doubts or are confused about the code we wrote together, the script we wrote is stored on GitHub. Check the description to access the link. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.